You are the author of 11 books, including 5 bestsellers.
Yep.
Also the recipient of the Silver Medal Illumination Book Award for a children's book.
Yeah.
And a 2-time TEDx speaker and certified in all of Dr. Brené Brown's curriculum.
I mean, I've had a lot of CEOs say to me, like, something to the version of like, I do have all the answers. I literally get paid to have all the answers. I can't say the words I don't know. Like, every time we have those discussions, especially if their team members are with them, they will always say, the time that you said the words I don't know was when I knew I trusted you the most. People are fairly terrible at doing clear communication. Most of us don't know how to ask for what we want and need. So then we live with resentment, blaming people for not meeting our expectations, even though we've never, ever stated those expectations out loud.
Well, Justine, thanks for taking the time. I do appreciate it. You are the author of 11 books, including 5 bestsellers.
Yep.
Also the recipient of the Silver Medal Illumination Book Award for a children's book.
Yeah.
And a 2-time TEDx speaker and certified in all of Dr. Brené Brown's curriculum. You work with businesses. You do a lot of speaking around the world. You also raise butterflies. Is that the right term?
Yeah, I think it is. It's a weird hobby. Such a weird hobby. But yep, I bring in the caterpillars and then release them as butterflies.
And before we just started recording here, we were talking about your courage deck, which I think is really fascinating. Can we touch on that real quick before we kind of zoom back out and get to your personal story?
I mean, I've been in some capacity of traditional mental health and professional development for 25 years at this point. And so I have all of these kind of like Justine-isms. And one of the biggest things I hear from people who have been through the trainings with me or who used to be clients when I was in private practice as a therapist, like I heard my pocket Justine today. Like I heard my little shoulder Justine. Like I heard your voice in my head, something that you taught me. And so I finally, I don't even know what made me think about it, but I've put like 60 of my sayings, my teaches into a card deck, kind of like an affirmation deck. And so we made it really beautiful. And so you shuffle the deck and you pull a card and you just receive what you need to receive. And if you don't like it, pick another card. And so I have a lot of like organizations that are using it in their like daily team huddles or like I'm using it in my events as like like a icebreaker in some of the conversations. I've got people keeping decks to give as gifts, or it's just been really cool hearing how people are using this little portable deck. It's like your own pocket, Justine, basically.
If you don't mind, can you share one Justine-ism with us?
Oh, there's so many. There are so many. Okay, probably one of the most, one that is always shared a ton every time I talk about it is, your perception of my story does not change my truth.
Your perception of my story doesn't change my truth. That's very interesting. And that's a great point. One that I'm sure we'll be diving deeper into as we talk about some of the topics that you're an expert in. But I like that. Where can I order that?
It's all on my website.
Okay.
So everything, we have a store on my website now that's actually brand new. So like this was kind of my first big like product merch launch. I have some t-shirts and stuff like that on Amazon just because Amazon makes everything so easy. But like it's just one of those things that it took that risk to kind of put it all out there because it was also, especially being an entrepreneur, of like, to bring me in as a speaker is expensive. And so this is an inexpensive way to get a little taste of it, right? Or to take, if you heard me in a keynote, to take what you learn and bring it home with you. And so it was like one of those pieces that really kind of helped me like reach more people and put it in one little place.
That's actually a great point you made there. I personally, if I'm listening to a keynote speaker, and I've heard Dr. Brené Brown speak, I think it was at an Inc. 5000 event. When I'm listening to them, I'm taking notes, I'm trying to take it all in, but then a year later, some of the key points that I wanted to take away from there, I find it hard to recall. So I think it's a great idea to have the deck out there. We'll be sure to link it in the notes, but before you were putting Justine-isms out into the world, where did you grow up? How did you grow up? What was your first exposure to maybe entrepreneurship or the way you think and what you do today?
Yeah. So I grew up in a small town, Iowa. So we're talking like no stoplight, kindergarten through 12th grade, one building. My parents met at their freshman pep rally. They got married young, had me young. They still live there, right? Like, it's just like, that's the way we do it in small town Iowa. And so I probably one of the most defining moments of my life, and I share it in several of my books, and it's a big piece of kind of when I teach the resilience lesson to my audiences is like, I had 2 back surgeries in high school. I was misdiagnosed for a year and a half until they finally found a broken back on a year-old x-ray. And I was in a body cast in high school for each surgery for 6 months. And so the first one was my freshman year of high school, and then the second one, I was just the 10% that the surgery didn't take. So they repeated it my senior year, and I was in a body cast again for 6 months. And so, like, once you kind of survive all of that, I was like, I do not want to stay in Iowa. I mean, I love my Iowa people, and I seriously, every time I have an event, people are like, what town are you from? Where are you from in Iowa? And we have this like connection. But I went to Truman State for undergrad, so in Kirksville. So I was like, peace out. I'm going to this big city, Kirksville, which is not a big city at all, but to me it was. And so I studied psychology from the very beginning, because in that time of being misdiagnosed, my first misdiagnosis was as conversion hysteria, which this was the early 90s, so we don't call it that anymore, but basically psychosomatic, your brain is making up something that's not really there. I mean, and so they made me go see a sports psychologist. And I remember being a young girl and just being like, what you do is pretty cool. And so I studied psychology from the very beginning. And then I came here to St. Louis for graduate school to get my degree in counseling. And I started my career working with clients who struggle with substance abuse, and then kind of fell into working with clients who struggle with eating disorders, and then went into private practice for about 11 years. And I left my private practice 6 years ago now to focus on speaking and doing workshops and things like that. And like, so really once you go into that private practice, especially on your own, you're an entrepreneur. I mean, it's just you're setting your own hours, like, and all that kind of process of like, I have to have evening hours, but I don't really want evening hours, right? Like just building that practice, and then knowing after 11 years, like I just wanted to have a bigger impact. And I loved my clients, but I no longer loved going to the office to see my clients. And so my husband, Chad, and I took that huge risk to go from a very steady income to, because when you start speaking, I mean, you speak for free for very little. And you're like, can I come please speak for your group? And so we've been building that for the last 6 years, and it's really just, it's grown extremely quickly. It's really amazing. It's just kind of been through connections and word of mouth at this point. Like we're just now getting into some of like SEO thing, all those like technical things as an entrepreneur that I was like, I didn't even have time to think about, because I was just like, I'm speaking a lot. So
you have to perfect your craft, right?
Yeah. And you're constantly like new keynotes, like new workshops. And so you're always kind of changing things up for the audience or the industry. And at the same time, like people will often ask me like, what's your specialty for like what industries? And I'm like, people with feelings. And most of us just weren't taught how to freaking deal with our feelings. And we're bringing all of that to work. And we're at work more than we are at home, awake at least. And so what I teach is how to create those cultures where people can be all of who they are and do it in a healthy way, which usually comes right back to ourselves and all of the feelings that we were never taught. It is my therapeutic skills, but brought to the organizations and teams.
Before we dive into what you teach during your keynote speaking engagements, or when you're working with organizations, I'd love to hear what really brought you to St. Louis and kept you here. Because I find it fascinating just hearing the different stories of folks that are not from St. Louis. I think it's a great region, great place to live, and just curious what your take is on it.
Yeah, me too. Well, because so many people here grew up here, right? And because we get asked that question a lot, because when people ask me about how I've grown this, it's been through word of mouth, and sometimes it feels hard because I didn't grow up in St. Louis, and neither did my husband. My husband grew up outside of St. Louis, but still didn't have that whole, what high school did you go to, that like built-in community. And this town is very much about who you know and who you're connected with. And so like, that's been a little bit hard in building this. But when I went a lot of people at Truman are from St. Louis. And so, and I remember, I graduated from Truman in 3.5 years. I graduated early because I did my internship all in one summer. And my friends were from St. Louis. And so I came here for graduate school because at that time, UMSL was one of the only accredited programs in counseling. And so I had a great program, and I knew I would have a support system. Like, my friends were moving back home after college. And so, so I moved here, which obviously was a much bigger city for me from where I grew up. And I went through, it was an interesting time because I was single for a while when all my friends were marrying the people from college. But then I eventually met my husband, who went to Truman, but we did not know each other. But we met through friends that went to Truman. And so then we've built our life here because he was here and I was here. And I love St. Louis. We have a lot of work to do in a lot of different areas, but like I love being in the middle of the country. I love the size of the city. I love all the different people. And so I love living here. I don't think I would not go back to Iowa. I love Iowa, but no, I would not go back.
I agree that it's the perfect size city.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
You have everything you need without the busyness or some of the issues that come with larger cities.
So true. So true. Yep.
So you were talking about people asking you what you focus on or what types of organizations you talk to. And you mentioned anyone that has people involved in it.
Yeah.
So one of the topics that you focus on is kind of like soft skills, the essential human skills needed in the workplace. Would you mind touching on what that looks like in your view, and then also how we can, as an organization, help people build up those soft skills or nurture those soft skills?
Yeah. It's always so funny when I'm always put on the soft skill track, right? And it's like, without these soft skills, you don't get any of your other stuff because we are people first. We are whole human beings. I think one of the biggest things that I talk about is, like, we have asked people to come do their job, do it right, do it fast, and leave all your stuff at the door. And we could argue that maybe that was possible. Post 2020, it's not possible. Like, they are sicker than they have ever been. They are struggling more than they've ever struggled. The world kind of feels like it's on fire all the time, and a lot of people don't even have bandwidth to think about that because they have so much going on in their individual lives, and they're coming to work for you. And so it doesn't mean that we like bring all our stuff with us. It means that we ask them to still come as a whole human being, and we create that culture where they can show up as all of who they are, no matter their beliefs or what's going on in their lives. And yes, they still need to do their job. There's accountability and all of that. And so these human essential skills, it is the elements of self-awareness, how do you respond to your life versus reacting from your emotions, which most of us are reacting from our emotions a lot. And we feel like we're controlled and manipulated by our emotions. And then we react from them in terrible ways, and then we beat ourselves up, and the whole cycle repeats. And that's really not what emotions were meant for. And so, like, a huge part of the work that I do is focus on that, the emotional well-being piece. Like, how do you feel it all? How do emotions come up in you? How do you talk about them? How do you cope with them? How do you move your body so that they don't own you and stay stuck, and they move through you? But then you also have to figure out, because that's going to help you turn towards yourself. So then how do you turn towards other people? So it's all in the communication skills, keeping language curious. It's in meeting people with empathy, like true empathy, not what people think empathy is. And because that really comes down to vulnerability. And so, like, we have to bring these skills back so that we can reconnect with one another, because change and healing and growth only take place in connection. And most of us we just don't know how to connect anymore. Part of it is because we're so connected on our phones that we're disconnected in real life. And so we have to kind of bring all of that back. Because people who feel like they're connected, they feel like they're seen and like they matter. And people who feel like they are seen and matter at work, they work harder for you. And you keep good talent. And right now it's really hard to keep good talent.
So if I had an organization where we want to make that a focus, we want more empathy in the workplace, we want people to show up as their whole self, and maybe we feel like people are reacting on emotion.
Yeah.
Where do we start to change it? What can we do in a week or a month to start to get on the right track?
Yeah. In a perfect world, it comes from the top, right? Like, that's a perfect world, right? Where I get to work with the leadership and start getting them the skill sets, and then it trickles down. A lot of times when I'm being called into organizations, I get this like whole piece of, well, our managers like really, really need you, right? They're the ones dealing with all the people things. And then we get to have that conversation of like, yeah, but they're Like they're going to come learn all of these things and then they're reporting to you and you don't necessarily have the same skill set yet. You might think you do. So what would it be like to do some of this work all together? Whether or not I'll have some companies will be like, we're going to do a book study before we bring you in. And I usually say, okay, good luck with that. Call me when it doesn't work. Because people are really, they're not doing books. They want to feel poured into. And so really when I work with organizations, I always tell people basically what I can do is I can design whatever we can kind of dream up based on how much time are you going to invest? What is your budget? We can work with budget. Who do you want? Who do you need to be in the room? What are their pain points? What are their goals? What are their biggest struggles? And then I can kind of design things, whether or not it's just that introduction keynote, or it's a series of workshops, or a half-day workshop, or a full-day retreat, or a 3-day training. There's so many different ways to do it. And it's just basically how deep do you want to go? Because you can. I always tell people I get messages still. I bet at least once a month from on a keynote. Someone will say, I saw you in a 90-minute keynote a year ago, and I still do something that you taught me from that keynote. It changed everything. It was just a keynote. So I always kind of tell them, imagine what it would be like if you came to a full training with me, because that's 3 days. And so there's just a lot of different ways to do it. And so I always tell organizations, where do you want to begin? And for a lot of organizations right now, where is the most pain at? Because there's a lot of pain right now in organizations. And so do we need to focus it on we're struggling to trust each other because no one trusts anybody right now. And so how do we help them learn that you can actually build trust with yourself and other people again, even if it's been broken? And so do you start there on topics, or do you just need them to learn how to manage? I'm doing a lot of navigating change and uncertain times, which all of that stuff comes back to your self-awareness. That's just because that's all that's in your control. So I'm doing a lot of those workshops right now.
So say if we wanted to work on the trust piece, and a company didn't have the ability or wasn't sure if they wanted to bring you in for 3 days, where would they start if they wanted to self-implement and see if this is what we want to work on and this is what we want to bring Justine in for?
Yeah. You get to go down the Justine rabbit hole on all the social media accounts. There's so much free content out there. Whether or not it's my social media accounts or any Brene Brown's social media accounts or anybody else's, but there's so much. The only thing that's holding people back from changing are themselves. And so that's where I become the therapist, be like, what's going on that you don't think that you are worthy of or deserve this change? It comes back to you. But if we're not quite sure, that's when I'm going to ask them to really look at my website, go down the rabbit hole of the TikTok account, and because I teach courage on all of the different accounts every day, just a little nugget. And it's that element of you start to kind of see this is what this is about. This is what it could look like to work with her. And I do have a lot of organizations too that we start with that 1 hour to 90-minute keynote, and they're like, we'll bring you in for the keynote, kind of say, here's Justine, here's the content. We're headed this way. We just don't know what it looks like yet. Because then also we can kind of come back to the team members and say, what do you need? I have at times with organizations done a Google form, out of these main pillars, what's keeping you up at night? What's causing the most conflict? Because we can begin there, right? But there is so much available just online, or you just read the book. And there's also, if you're talking Brene Brown's work, the Dare to Lead Hub is full of free resources. It's just no one's utilizing them because it's really hard to do it without a facilitator. We are just awesome at self-sabotage.
What are you seeing in the workplace, in terms of conflict and things like that? Is it primarily based around communication? Is it something much deeper than that, and you think it's a generational divide, societal, something like that? What are you just seeing in your interactions?
The generational conversation's huge right now. We have a generation that they're working longer than they've ever worked, and they're working alongside a generation that they don't understand. They've grown up very differently, and so the generational piece it comes up in almost every event. And it ties into all of the other big pieces, the trust stuff that we have happening We just don't trust anybody. We don't trust our larger entities at this point. And so even if you, as my leader, you've never broken my trust, I don't trust anybody right now. So I'm going to project that onto you. And that eats away at our connection and our relationship. It affects how we communicate with one another. People are fairly terrible at doing clear communication. Most of us don't know how to ask for what we want and need in a clear way. Or we never state it out loud, but we still expect people to know what we want and need. So then we live with resentment, blaming people for not meeting our expectations, even though we've never, ever stated those expectations out loud. And that eats away at your relationship. And so those are those are the biggest things. And really, the level of burnout that we're in at this point is probably, that's the icing on the cake. It is destroying a lot of cultures, unfortunately.
I think sometimes I'm guilty of the unsaid expectation, expecting certain things, but not clearly defining, what it is that I expect. So for me to improve there, would it just be simply being open about absolutely everything that I expect, whether it's from a partner or someone that's reporting to me?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the sayings that we have in the Dare Lead work is clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And so because a lot of stuff that we tell ourselves that we don't say things to other people, we don't have the hard conversation because I don't want to make you uncomfortable. And that it's such a lie. I don't want to have the hard conversation with you because I don't know how to navigate my discomfort. And so we just don't say things. And so, because how often have we've communicated what we needed from somebody. We didn't do it in a great, clear way, especially not maybe tying it to our mission, our values as an org, their values as a person, my values as a person. We haven't tied it to this larger picture. And so then they come back to you with a finished product and you're like, this is not what I actually needed at all, except you didn't actually communicate what you needed in a clear enough way. And so then you usually what happens is we hold on to that resentment, oh my God. And that affects the relationship. And so it is being very, very clear, speaking expectations out loud in a clear way. I think where a lot of people get tripped up too is that we communicate them in the way that we receive communication, and they need to be communicated in a way that the other person can receive them. And that's where we come back to even some of the tried and true therapeutic skills. Can you tell me what you just heard me say? Can you kind of can you tell me what you think I'm needing from you? What did you hear? Because maybe I didn't say it right. Right? Or maybe you didn't hear me right. But let's just lay that on the table. And I know one of the biggest things I get back from people is well, I don't freaking have time for that. I know. You also don't have time for stuff to not be done correctly the first time.
So when you say communicating in the way that maybe they'll understand it, is that an email versus a conversation? Is that maybe some visual aids versus just verbal? Is that what you're talking about there?
It could be all of it. I know for me, so I have a small team and I receive feedback. I literally have someone on my team that when I first brought her on, she would come and watch me speak. And I want her feedback. What can I do better? And I learned so quickly that I was not able to receive it when we sat down and had a conversation. And I was my brain just receives it better when it's this long, ridiculously detailed email from you. So I can kind of take it piece by piece. And it's partly because of just how I'm wired, how I think, especially when I'm looking at that kind of feedback. But I think absolutely having those conversations with people do you need to see it in something, a graphic? Is it best in email? Do we need to have a conversation? We're always going to come back to clear is always best in a conversation. And then most people still need to circle back with the email, right? Because so much can also just be miscommunicated in a conversation. So especially if it's on freaking Zoom or virtual. Between multitasking and the delay and stuff like that, you can bank on people not getting all of it.
That makes sense, and I would agree with that. I also kind of receive feedback better via email.
Yeah.
It allows me to digest it and not worry about maybe my initial reaction to the feedback. So you mentioned a few times being vulnerable, and I think you also mentioned kind of not separating who you are at work and outside of work. I can see that potentially becoming complicated, depending on who
Yeah.
you are outside of
Sure.
work and at work. How do you help organizations navigate that? Are there some rules or boundaries
Yeah.
you still set?
Yeah, it is. I always you can always kind of feel I always kind of get a little bit of pushback when I say, like, you are not a work person and a home person. You're one person. And what would it look like to be one person in all of those spaces of your life? And like, now, yes, I when I'm on stage speaking to 10,000 people, I pull from different parts of my personality. It's still me, though. I mean, it's one of the number one things that I hear when I meet people, like, you are exactly as you appear on stage. Like, you are exactly as you appear on your Instagram accounts. I literally had somebody say the other day, we did a virtual discovery call, and she goes, oh, I watch your Instagram stories, so I'm used to, like, you not having makeup on. Like, she goes, you are literally exactly who you present to be. And I was like, thank you. That is what my values are, right? Like, so that means a lot to me. But there is that element. I think we've really thought that, like, I just have to be this completely different human being at work, and in reality, it's like, or is it just you're pulling from different parts of your personality? Like, of course, you probably don't speak to your leader or to the people that you lead in the way that you speak to your children. And I would hope that if your people at work saw you outside of work, they'd still be like, oh yeah, that's totally who he is. That's him. Because that's authenticity, that's vulnerability, and that's how you build connection, which is how you build trust. You have a trust issue, you have a connection issue, you have a connection issue, you have a vulnerability issue.
Can you repeat that?
You got trust issues.
Okay.
You have a connection issue. You got a connection issue. You have a vulnerability issue. It all kind of comes back down to that. Like, how do we help people show up as all of who they are? Now, that doesn't mean that I'm telling you my deepest, darkest secrets today, because that's not appropriate. Vulnerability always has boundaries. Like, the most intimate details of my life are reserved for, like, a very small group of people. The older I have gotten, the smaller that group has gotten, right? And at the same time, yes, when I speak, when I teach, the books that I've written, very vulnerable, very transparent. The harder stories, those have been worked through, right? Like, I've talked to a coach or a therapist about them. They've been healed. I don't ever share from a wound. I share from a scar. And so, because that's the boundary that you set around it. And still me, still all of who I am. But you build so much more trust at work when you bring your whole self.
That makes sense. So you are setting boundaries. You're not necessarily, like, if you have something negative going on in your personal life, you're not necessarily coming into work and just being negative. But you're being authentic to who you are in your core, I guess you could say, like who you really are as a person. Because what's going on around you, if I understand correctly, isn't necessarily who you are as a person. Does that make sense?
So true. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, like an example of that, let's say, and I have something going on. I've shared it a couple times on my Instagram. Like, I have something really big going on that's been really, really hard that I can't share publicly yet. And everyone's okay. It's going to be a huge change, but I can't share it yet. It's not in the place where, and I know that's really annoying because I'm annoyed by that when people say that stuff on social media, and there's a place for boundaries. So, like, I'm having a hard time, and yet I still have to come to work and lead. Even if you don't say that you're having a hard time and you just fake it and try to pretend, for the most part, people know. They know you. Hopefully. And so they can tell that you're being inauthentic. And so what would it feel like to be more of like, I got some stuff going on, and there's a lot that just doesn't feel okay right now. And I promise, like, I'll let you know more when I can let you know more. And I know that might be annoying and kind of hard for you right now, but like, we're going to do our jobs, and this is kind of what's in my control. And so here I am, but I just wanted to let you know that things are kind of not all right in a different space of my life. And so I might be like acting a little goofy. And if you ever have a question about any of it, please just ask me. But I don't want you making up stories because I seem a little off. Like, that transparency, which doesn't include you sharing stuff that's not ready to be shared. It's just the transparency of, like, something's off. I'm just going to name it. Like, one of my other big pieces, it's in my courage deck, the unspoken is never benign.
That's a great point, and in line with how I was thinking about this when you said, bringing your whole self to work. Because my thought was, if you're a leader, and I'm going to say you need, but I know you don't need to, but my thought was you need to, put on this brave face, and you need to be, someone that people are comfortable with leading an organization. But to your point, as long as you're communicating clearly and letting folks know that perhaps if you're off, it's not because the company's
Yes.
failing, it's
Right.
something going on with you personally.
Exactly. There have been so many of my events that, I've had a lot of CEOs say to me, like, something to the version of like, well, like, I do have all the answers. I literally get paid to have all the answers. I can't say the words I don't know. Like, I once had a CEO say to me, like, I've never said I'm sorry. I was trained not to do that. And every time we have those discussions, and especially if their team members are with them, they will always say, the time that you said the words I don't know was when I knew I trusted you the most. Like, when you showed me your humanity. Like, the bravest words that we can sometimes say are, I don't know. This is what I think I know. What do you know? Like, and let's kind of like navigate it together. Or some of the other bravest words that we can say are, I screwed it up. I really screwed that up, and this is what I'm going to do to make it right. And I know, especially when you're the person with most power, that can feel, I think for some people, they've been taught that it's inappropriate, that it's not okay. And in reality, I think especially where the world is and where the workplaces are needing to shift, especially with the younger generation, if you want to bring in young talent and keep them, that vulnerability and authenticity is valued more than anything. The vulnerability and authenticity of the words, like, I don't know, actually. This is what I'm going to do to find out, though. When I do know, I'll let you know. That builds more trust than you being like, I got everything under control, we're good. Because I'm the leader, so we're good. It feels, that doesn't grow in connection, I don't think, for a lot of people.
Sure. So it builds the connection and the trust
Yeah.
with other people on your team. That makes a lot of sense to me. If you have a team member, like you mentioned, the younger generation, if you have a team member that is, I don't want to say too vulnerable, but maybe is no longer performing due to stuff going on. Yeah, just stuff. In your opinion, are you still nurturing, fostering a great work environment if you put your foot down and set maybe some boundaries around that as well?
I'm getting some version of that question a lot. Like, whether or not it's like I have a younger team member that overshares, or when did we become so sensitive all of a sudden? And at first I will be an annoying therapist, and I ask people, like, what's going on for you that you're sensitive to their sensitivity? Like, because that's all that I want you to become self-aware too. And so, like, there's this element of like, they have to do their job. And somewhere along the line, we have, I don't know if it's been taught or we've internalized it this way, but we think for some reason that empathy and accountability are mutually exclusive. And they're not. When I hold you with empathy and compassion as a human being, you got a lot of stuff going on, things like that. And this is what I need from you. These are your expectations. This is your job. How can I help you get there? What does support look like? And then on top of that, if you can't get there, here's what happens. Because there are natural consequences to not meeting those deadlines or getting your work done in a way that is acceptable. I can still care for your humanity, though. Because I assure you, them losing their job is not going to help what's going on in their life. And plus, you can't, most of the orgs I work with, they cannot afford to lose another person. And so what's it look like to live in this tension of both, that I'm going to care and have compassion and empathy for them while also holding them very accountable in a way that's clear, stating those expectations, coming up with a plan of how to help them meet those expectations, and also letting them know if they can't, this is what happens.
And that goes back to your point about difficult conversations, because I think that's a pretty difficult conversation to have.
It's a very difficult conversation to have. It's super uncomfortable. And half the battle of that conversation is us navigating how to not like tap out when we get so overwhelmed by the emotion in it. Because emotion has a lot of physiology. And that's usually when we're out. Like, and so sometimes I'll work with leaders a lot and just people in general and be like, just name the awkward. Just be like, this is a hard conversation. I'm actually feeling pretty awkward about it. And so I just want to name it. And like, I know you got some stuff going on at home. You've shared some of it with me. If you want to share more with me, you can. Except like you've missed that deadline 3 times and you cannot miss it again. What do you need? How can I help you to get that deadline done? And if you can't this 4th time, this is what happens. That's also clearly stated. But what would it be like to name the, half of that is, this is really freaking awkward. This is a hard conversation and we need to have it because not having it's just making it worse.
So in your opinion, or in your experience, at least putting your feelings out there and saying it's awkward for you or for both of you generally helps.
It does. It builds connection because they're feeling it too. That's where when we don't name some of that stuff, it just holds so much power over us, and which means then it owns us, and we can't get down to like what is actually changeable or workable, and how can we do it together in collaboration.
I personally, I'm gonna take that because
Okay.
I sometimes struggle with difficult conversations,
It's
and I'm
hard.
sure a lot of folks listening struggle with it as well, especially when it comes to the workplace and you're trying to balance that, not wanting to be heartless, but also
I know.
wanting the company to continue to thrive,
Yeah,
which is
absolutely.
necessary.
I know that it's one of the biggest things I hear people be like, I know you want me to be empathic, but like, I just need people to do their freaking job. I go, I know. And you're actually probably more likely to get them to do their job when you're empathic with them because they're humans and they're more than what they do for you. What would it be like to bring humanity back? Because that's really a big piece of what's missing right now.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to remind folks of is the fact that if someone works for your company, they're committing like a third of their life to your cause, whatever the company's cause is. So it's in your benefit to foster a great work environment. Another topic that you talk about often is self-care and self-love. It's a topic that to be transparent, I don't fully understand. Because sometimes I see self-care being used as a way to, in my opinion, be maybe a little selfish.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's people weaponizing self-care or self-love, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on the topic, and I'm sure I'll have some clarifying questions.
Well, there's many of us. I think some of us did grow up in homes where both self-care, self-love, emotions, like we were taught that those things were self-indulgent or frivolous or selfish, or maybe like we were made fun of for them, right? Or maybe our households just like had no capacity, right? Like no language for it at all, right? I hear a lot, especially depending on cultures and things like that. Like, well, you just freaking do it. Like plow through, pick yourself up, dust yourself off. Like my family saying was chin up, Justine, right? Like all of these things that we just keep plowing through it. And there's an element of like, we're human beings. You're not this endless black hole where you can just keep stuffing down your unprocessed emotional feelings and keep going and keep working and plowing through, stuffing down, medicating, numbing, denying, all of these things. Like you do have to take care of yourself. And so, I mean, when we look at like the self-care movement, this is well beyond like, sitting down and reading a good book or baths or whatever else. Like when I talk about self-care, like when I take care of myself, I am choosing happy. And I am also like in those acts of self-care, choosing self-love, which many of us were not freaking ever taught how to love ourselves and live from our true worth and how loved we are. And it's not working for us anymore. I mean, all you have to do is scroll social media to see that. Like people are more burnt out than they've ever been. And it's just because they're not truly taking care of themselves. And I always tell people like, if you have never done true self-care, and after my husband and I went through an infertility journey. And so when I had to really dig my way out of the deep dark hole of grief and like, I mean, it was really hard. And I'm a therapist. I teach this for a living. I have for 25 years at this point, but I started with a Post-it note every day. I had a sticky note and I wrote the same 5 things on it: eat, sleep, drink water, move my body, and then I added coloring, like color in a coloring book. So I added like that fifth thing was like more of like that self-care, sit with yourself, but like eat, sleep, drink water, move your body. That is not self-care. Those are human obligations because we're human beings, except most of us are not freaking doing those things. And so to even begin to think about taking care of yourselves, we have to think about like, are you actually taking care of the foundational pieces of your health? Are you embodying your body again? Do you know what it's like to sit and be in your body? Are you feeding yourself well? Are you drinking good water? Are you drinking enough of it? How's your sleep? I always tell my clients, like, if you're not, like, when I was in private practice, actually, I would tell people, like, that would be the first place we would start, would be sleep. Because no matter how much trauma they walked in the door with, if I could help them improve their sleep, it would improve 90% of their stuff. People just they're not only not sleeping enough, they're not sleeping well. And so I would start people with a small nighttime routine. Don't even start to do a morning routine until you have a nighttime routine and you're getting better sleep. But it's this element of like, what's it look like to actually act and show up and follow through for yourself, for your humanity, the being part of who we are, versus really what the world tells us that we have to do and produce and things like that element part, because that is slowly killing us in reality.
So the foundational pieces you mentioned,
Yeah.
that could be defined as self-care, self-love.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think, especially
Understood.
if someone's starting from nothing. Like if I got someone who is maybe in deep trauma or grief, or like their life is just, I mean, it's a lot. I'm starting them with eat, sleep, drink water, move your body. And then I'm going to ask them to add one thing. Like, is it taking a walk by yourself every day? Is it scrolling funny TikTok for 10 minutes with a timer, right? So you know it. Like, is it coloring? Is it meditating? Are you ready to meditate? Go for it. Like, sit your butt down and be quiet. But if you're not ready for that, then color in a coloring book for 10 minutes, because you'd be surprised. Journaling, a gratitude list. Gratitude list will change people's lives. I literally just had somebody email me today and she goes, I have to tell you, keeping a daily gratitude list has changed everything. I was like, I know. Something so simple, and it will change everything.
And the self-love piece is that literally just appreciating yourself?
Mm-hmm. I always tell people you can't give what you don't have. So it's really hard to love others when you don't love yourself. For most of us, whether or not you are conscious of it or not, that self-talk is probably not super kind. I'm an idiot. I'm such a failure. I'm never going to succeed at this. I'm insignificant. I don't matter. I'm unworthy. I'm not enough. Like not rich enough, not thin enough, not happy enough, whatever it might be. Like whether or not you're conscious of it, like those grooves are really deep in our brain. And so the self-love part is, I think for a lot of people, like to start to rewrite and reclaim some of those stories, they have to first do it in behavior. So what's it look like for you to show up and follow through for yourself, to actually do a nighttime routine so you improve your sleep, to actually do a morning routine, to show up for you first before you show up for everybody else in your life, to act as if you love yourself well, because then it's going to start to seep in and those new grooves will come in that you are significant. You absolutely matter and you are loved. Like that element for me, for my mission statement is to help people remember how loved they are. And then how to live from that love out in the world. Because most people are not living from that at all. They think they have to earn it or produce to get it. And it's just, nope, you just inherently are. You got breath, you're not done, you're enough.
In your opinion, like, because like as an entrepreneur, and I'm sure you've gone through similar stretches, there's long stretches where I haven't had the self-care piece, like whether it's working out or it's, you know, if you're adding that fifth thing, like coloring or whatever. If you're not doing that for a time period that is going to be somewhat defined, like let's say a year or 2 years, because you're building something. In your opinion, is that still... is that an ideal way to go about it, or do you need to try to prioritize the self-care over everything else?
I think one of the things we have to remember especially is the body is really wise and the body will keep score. And so if you are not taking care of your body, you'll crash and burn. Eventually, some of us sooner than later, for sure. I always tell, like, there will definitely be seasons, right? Like, I have a girlfriend that always says, like, you're literally like, I'm just not as disciplined as you. And I was like, I am a very disciplined person. That is part of who I am. It's part of my value set. I am very disciplined. But like I need you to remind you of like when I pick something up new that I'm doing and I don't stick with it or it falls off, the difference between me and her is like, I don't beat myself up for it. I don't think I'm like a piece of crap for not doing it. Or why can't I just do it? Do what you teach people, Justine. Like, why just finish that yoga challenge? And it was like, I just didn't like, I had to replace with something else that I actually liked better or something like that. And if I want to pick it back up again, I'll pick it back up again. And so it's like, because change will never happen in disconnection. And when you shame and judge and blame yourself, and that self-talk is not from the place of self-love, you're not going to pick it back up. And so like that, it's like, yes, I'm disciplined, but also like I'm not perfect. Those are very different things. I'm disciplined, but I'm not perfect. And when I'm not perfect, I meet myself with self-compassion and grace to begin again. But then the other piece too, like there will always be seasons that like life is just a lot and stuff falls off. And so I always tell people like, because I think what happens a lot, our brain will be like, okay, well, I'll get back on track on Monday. And then Monday happens, and you're like, okay, I'll get back on track on the first of the month. And then that happens, like, okay, I'll start January 1, New Year's resolution, which we all know how that works out. So it's like, what if you just begin again the next day, but you just add one tiny thing? It doesn't need to be the whole long freaking routine that you fell off of, but you just choose one piece, the gratitude list, or take a walk instead of going to the gym. Like, start moving your body. Like, but you choose one tiny next best step, not the right step, not the perfect step, but the next best step. You stick with that for hopefully a couple weeks, and then you add another thing. Or if you don't stick with it, you then begin again.
So if you're busy building something or something else is going on in your life, at least taking a walk instead of having a strict diet and working out because you can't or feel like you can't.
Right. Moving your body, especially in nature, the more research that comes out, just calming this whole central nervous system down. It's the easiest, most accessible, and most affordable way to take care of yourself. I just said it yesterday on my Instagram stories. I was like, I need people to start taking care of themselves more. Like the level of illness and burnout that I see everywhere I go, it's really not good. And when you consider that here in the United States, we are the most medicated society in the world with the worst health outcomes, we have to deal with our emotions. We have to take better care of our bodies and embody this again.
When you say like spending time in nature or walking in nature, I've always been curious about people's definition of stuff like this.
Yeah.
Like, would you define a county park, going to walk in a county park as like nature, or do you mean more like a state park or something?
Oh, no, I mean anything.
Okay.
It is interesting because like not everyone is a nature person. I get it. Also, I kind of think that just means that you haven't like really looked at like to be in awe and wonder and delight is just, I don't know, it helps you make sense of this world that's on fire a little bit. And so I literally, if you live in the city, you just freaking get outside in the fresh air, in the sunshine, and walk. What we know, like especially when it comes to a walk, you're moving forward. And what happens when we're walking is we often scan the horizons back side to side. Well, that's EMDR, eye movement desensitization. It's a kind of trauma therapy. When we move our eyes back and forth, or like even just like EMDR, they'll tap your legs every other, or sometimes you'll have like plates that vibrate in your hands and it'll go every other. What that's doing when you move your eyes as you're walking and you're scanning the path in front of you, you're accessing both hemispheres of the brain at the same time, which means you can receive tough information or process tough information in a more holistic way. And so like, literally, there's so much research on just taking a walk outside that is so good for us. And like, I struggle with like when I travel, especially when I was just in Kansas City for a 3-day training. I was in downtown Kansas City. It's concrete everywhere. It smells like exhaust everywhere. And it's like, okay, what is in my power? I didn't have time to get to the near park or whatever. And so it's like, I can sit outside, at least with my face to the sun for a little bit. It is not fresh air. And I was like, but by the time I got home, my feet were in the grass. I was outside. I was in my flower gardens, like, because I felt so disconnected to the thing that's bigger than me, no matter what you believe it is. Right. But like that connection, that awe, wonder, embodiment piece, we're not talking about it enough.
That's it's a very important point that you just made. I do feel like not enough people are living in a state of curiosity and just
Yes.
that awe, wonder you talked
Yes.
about, and just I feel like that helps you be so grateful for where you are, no matter where you are
I agree.
in your life or in the world.
Yeah. Oh, we've really lost our ability to be curious, and the world's making money off of that. Like at this point, that's their goal. Like it's part of keeping us divided, and all you have to do is do a little bit of research on how algorithms work. They don't want you to be curious, and it's destroying us. It's horrible.
That's a great way to end the conversation there.
That's hard. Oh, be curious. Just be curious about people and yourself.
Yeah. No, I fully agree with that. We've been chatting for close to an hour. And I do appreciate your time. I want to be respectful of it. We like to end each show with what we call a hole-in-one.
Okay.
Which is your greatest piece of advice that you can give that listeners, viewers could implement in either their life or their business today. Taking a walk would have been a great one. So I'm sorry for covering that already. But if you have anything left in the tank, another Justine-ism, if you can share, that'd be great.
I think to truly show up as all of who you are in all of the spaces of your life. And in order to do that, you actually have to know who you are, which means you need to meet yourself with love and compassion and grace and curiosity.
Thank you for sharing that. And I do appreciate your time again, Justine.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Where can listeners, viewers learn more about you and what you do?
Yeah, everything's just my name. So my website's justinefroker.com. All my handles on social media are Justine Froker. And so you go down certain rabbit holes on those social media accounts, you'll get like all the different hairstyles over the years. But I always tell people, like, don't use my content to numb out from your feelings. Because I can also see it, like, when I wake up, I'm like, oh, they just liked 20 videos. I'm like, yo, right there? But yep, everything's just my name. So
thanks for sharing. We'll be sure to link that.
Okay,
Appreciate
awesome.
your time again.
Thank you.